Seat, please.
Thank you.
Uh,
Oh, what's this pen? It's yours.
sorry?
Is it yours?
No, I think someone left it. Not exactly my color. Okay. As people leave water, they leave notebooks
So
sometimes.
this is not your
No,
water either?
no, tampoco. Y tengo este desde el año pasado. Tengo años con este.
Y nadie
No
vino a
estoy
reclamarlo.
esperando, pues para ver si se ven.
Y nadie ha venido a reclamar.
No, ¿cómo ves? Bueno. Okay, research questions? Would you like to go over your research questions?
Ya, nada más
Alright.
que no supe si como no lo supe. Les dije, no me lo supe. Digo, bueno, no los llevo
Okay.
así. Well, I don't know. I think I have to work on that. But, well, this is the idea.
Okay.
Well,
So, how do teachers make use of verbal communication to give instructions? How do teachers make use of nonverbal communication to give instructions? And how do students react towards the way the teacher gives instructions? Okay. So, how do teachers use verbal communication? Now, have you found some primary research articles that relate to what you want to study? What you wanna
more or less
research?
because I took a look to the researches that I used for the past literature review.
Okay.
They are about instructions, and as I mentioned, the last tutorial sessions, just like one or two mention like the way they are given, like with verbal instructions, blah, blah, blah. And I was looking for also verbal and non-verbal communication to see what can I get.
Because
I was
Go ahead.
I was having some trouble finding information
Uh-huh.
yesterday and
Okay.
the day before yesterday.
All right. I'm thinking, for example, nonverbal communication in your literature review. If you have information about hand gestures, for example, or facial expressions, do you recall in your literature review? Do you talk about different forms of nonverbal communication, or because, for example, if you talk about gestures in your literature review, you might adapt your second research question and ask, how do teachers use gestures when to give instructions or to clarify information when they're giving?
More specific, I mean.
Yeah, if it's pretty much what you're talking about in your literature review, or if it's related to some of the primary research articles that you have, that you've found, because I don't want to, change a lot here. I want to try to use what you already have. So, if you tell me that your literature review talks a lot about gestures and different types of gestures, then you might focus on gestures for that second research question. Now, if you tell me that you have a lot of other nonverbal communication, information, then maybe not. What I'm trying to do is find a way if we need to narrow down your research question. So, taking the nonverbal communication question. That's my question for you, is if there's a way, if you have research that talks more specific.
No, it's like more general, like for example, some information that I found says that, for example, that teachers combine verbal but not verbal communication when giving instructions or explaining. That was as having an example that they use the physical support, along with the words. And
have you? Because I don't see your literature review here.
No.
So yeah, if you want to just move everything over, even if you have to make changes, because then it helps me kind of see what you already have.
Yeah.
And then try to work with. With
the
that.
question is, do I paste it like the way it is from
Well,
the last semester?
Well, if you think that you are going to use most or all of your literature review, just move it over, even though it's not complete, even if you have to make changes, just so and then you tell me, you know, kind of what you are thinking, if you need to make a lot of changes or if you just have questions about certain parts of your literature review or whatever. I'm not looking, you know, what I'm wanting everyone to do is to upload as much information as you have here as frequently as possible. So whenever we have our tutoring sessions, I can say, okay, I see you have this, you know, and you know, it kind of helps both of us.
Yeah.
So, so you know, that's kind of what I'm asking about here with your research questions. We can work with these research questions, but if there is, you know, if you can, because the next question in step 2 is what you're going to examine, right? And you list here, examine teachers' behaviors. So we might want to try to get a little bit more specific, like what types of behaviors. For example, gestures. See what I mean? Or you could say behaviors, language. What do they say? Do they repeat themselves? Okay, so you're going to be observing language. So the examples that are in the handout are meant to be kind of as a guide, but we still might need to be a little bit more specific. So instead of saying teacher behaviors, we say certain language or gestures or facial expressions or something else. So that's kind of, I think we can work with these research questions, but ask yourself, look at what you have, the research that you have, your literature review, and see if there's an opportunity to be more specific in your research questions, and also in step 2 here where we ask ourselves, what are we going to examine specifically? So are we going to examine hand gestures? And gestures might even include facial expressions, I don't know. You look at the literature and find examples of nonverbal communication, because that is what you'll be looking for when you do your own research. That's the thing. So.
And also with the verbal, what kind of?
Okay, so verbal. Then now we look at, again, asking what do you have in your literature review, but do you recall some details that you have for verbal communication?
For example, well, it talks about eye contact and.
So eye contact would be more nonverbal, right? But that might be hard to, kind of hard to measure. I mean, you can observe it to a degree, but if you're looking at the whole class, it might be. I mean, I'm not sure. Yeah, because everything that you are going to be examining, you have to ask yourself, how are you going to measure it, right? So it has to be measurable. So.
Yeah. For example,
go ahead.
What I have for verbal, it's what I found that one author says that it is like divided into 3 categories, like imperatives, interrogatives, and declaratives.
Okay. All right. So those are how does that author describe those 3 parts? Is it 3 ways?
3 categories, like 3 categories. Like in the case the teacher directives can be divided into 3 categories.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? Can you repeat that sentence?
It's here.
So just, okay, so instructions can in numerous ways. Verbal directions, various forms, alright. Physical manipulations. Okay. Alright, now, okay, so this is just one, there are 2 authors, but this is from one source.
Yeah, one source.
Look at all your sources. What I would do is make a list and say, okay, these authors say verbal directions, various forms, dialectics, and embodied demonstration. Make a list. These authors list this as verbal communication, and list all of the wording, the terminology, and then look at it to see if there's some commonalities and differences. And then ask yourself, of all those different forms, those technical terms for giving instructions, ask yourself, what can I measure? What can I focus on for my research? And call it something. call it whatever they call it, or maybe two authors or two sources refer to the same thing, but they have two different names. Just decide on the wording that you want to use, the classification. Okay, and then you decide, because maybe there are too many listed on here to observe. I don't know, or maybe not. That's what you need to ask yourself. What can you do, right, this semester? Because you don't want to choose too many and say, oh, there's no way I can measure all those. Maybe some of them are more difficult to measure. So think about that, and then you come up with those certain aspects of verbal communication that you want to do for your own research. Okay, and then try to take that and look again at your first research question, and just ask yourself if you need to modify it a little bit to be more specific, or you just leave it the way it is.
Okay.
But either way, even if you leave your research question the way it is, this exercise that I'm asking you to do, this has to be clear for you later on when you decide, okay, what instruments am I going to need so I can make sure that I collect this information. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right, so for right now, we'll leave it the way it is, but please go through that, because this, even if you leave the questions the way they are, it'll be very clear in your mind what those types are. Same way for nonverbal communication, right? So, right, and make sure that I would list in step 2 precisely the things that you're going to examine that will help you identify the things that we just talked about, like verbal non-various forms of demonstrations, physical manipulations, or whatever. Like if they give directives, or I don't know. Yeah. So that's one that's one thing I would think about. Now I don't know if they mentioned, some of the authors mentioned like repetition or things like that.
Yeah. Well,
but just figure out what you want to do, because I don't want you to have too many categories where it's just going to be too difficult to. I mean, it just depends on
So basically, I have to choose, for example, for nonverbal, what am I going to measure from nonverbal, and what am I?
What you're going to measure and what you're able to measure, given our context, thinking about the teachers and right, and if it's just too much to change in the question, fine, we'll leave the questions the way they are. But you do need to be very clear and I would modify what you're going to examine. And even if you have a long list, I'd rather have it there so it's clear for you.
Is there a uniform on the map? No. What I'm going to examine is teachers' gestures, for example, gestures and.
Yeah, you can say, I'm going to examine teachers' gestures, directives, demonstrations, whatever these little categories are, right?
Okay.
But that make sense to you, that are different, right? Because if and in that way we can leave the research questions kind of general, but we know here very clearly what you plan to examine, right? And so what you might do is, when you observe, you might observe frequency and the time spent on each, right? So maybe you have several categories. You have several categories for verbal communication, several categories perhaps for nonverbal communication. But each time the teacher is doing one of these things, you're counting how many times the teacher's doing it and for how long, like the minutes. So you'll be kind of like timing everything they say, and you'll be doing kind of a discourse analysis, but you won't be actually evaluating all the language, the detailed language. You'll be just enough language so you say, okay, for 30 seconds they were doing a directive, right?
Okay.
And then maybe the teacher 5 minutes later did it again, said, okay, it happened twice. The first time it lasted 30 seconds, the second time it lasted, and so from there you're going to be looking for kind of patterns.
Okay.
See what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. Yes, and for example, just to complement, for example, I was thinking, if I look for information regarding verbal and nonverbal communication, I mean, to complement the information about giving instructions, I mean, how
In your literature review?
Uh-huh.
Well, do you have something for verbal and nonverbal already, or not?
Yes, I was looking for.
Or is this something you need to add?
I need to add. I was looking for information about that.
Okay. Well, you need to decide if you want to focus on both or just one. On just verbal or just nonverbal or both. Based on your literature review. So if you have if you have more information about nonverbal communication and different categories, well, then just focus on nonverbal communication. We'll come up with research questions that are focused only on nonverbal communication. And you might have two questions. For example, you might say, how often do teachers use nonverbal communication when giving instructions? And the second question, how much time is spent doing nonverbal communication and when giving instructions, something like that.
Okay.
So you're going back to the frequency and the time duration,
Okay.
right? So really just depends on your literature review, and what information, and again, look for studies that help you kind of get some ideas about some examples, because right now we're just kind of talking without referencing any other research, but it's very important to try to.
Because I was looking for that. I mean, about verbal and non-verbal, and to see what could I get.
Okay.
And I was having trouble finding information.
Okay.
Yeah, because I look for in the library here in the university. I would look for books also here in the library to see if I find something.
Okay. So in your literature review from last semester, do you talk more about verbal communication or nonverbal?
It's like a combination.
Okay.
Yeah, a combination of both.
Okay. So then maybe think about, observing both. And maybe some are happening at the same time, right? So they're giving gestures and you're observing both the verbal and nonverbal at the same time, but you'll have to figure a way later to demonstrate that, maybe through a graph timeline, saying, okay, these are happening, verbal and nonverbal are happening kind of at the same time or something. But
yeah, because I have also, for example, for verbal, that sometimes teachers use commands, the use of commands and something like that. The use of phrases. They mentioned something about pet phrases.
Okay.
And phrases like, I like you to do this, and blah, blah, blah.
All right. So the only thing that I'm curious now about is the third question about the students.
Yeah.
And at this point that would be like, the least important of the three that you have there. So let's think about how much you're going to, because it may be a little bit much to think a lot about the.
Okay.
I mean, this might be, I think, maybe a focus more on just the teacher, and you can ask the teacher and interview the teacher and that type of thing to get and kind of observe maybe the student's overall behavior in the class, right? Or that might, if it complements what you're researching, but just kind of put a question mark there for the third one. And again, try to find research articles. I mean, you need to start developing, go ahead and move your whatever you have over. Start making any changes, and at any point you want me to look at it, we'll be looking at it each week in our tutoring session. But I won't be making specific recommendations on the document unless you send me an email and you want me to, or based on our conversations you want me to make some sort of change. So I'd rather you work as much as possible in the Google Drive document, because I'm not going to grade anything until February 28th. So it can look out of order or whatever. but we need to be talking about how you're going to organize your ideas. I'd like to see what you have.
Yes.
You tell me what still needs to be changed, how you're thinking about organizing it, so we can work on that.
Yeah, just
starting.
I didn't upload it because I have like in this literature review is like a combination between giving instructions and classroom management.
Okay.
And that's why I thought like, should I take that out? Or should I paste it like this?
Okay.
The
Well,
way it is?
think of the Google Drive document as a working document.
Uh-huh,
I mean,
yeah.
feel free to work in there. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna, like I said, I'm not. In fact, I'm not gonna even look at it unless you tell me, and then I may look at it at the beginning of each session to see, okay, more or less what you have. But however you'd like to work. But I like Google Drive because you won't lose anything for one, and it's easy to manipulate and move around the text and things like that. And so yeah.
Okay.
So I would go ahead and start uploading and start organizing your work. Go ahead.
Do I just copy and paste from? It doesn't modify like the format.
Yeah, it shouldn't. Let's open up your document here. What you can do is just copy and paste it like anywhere here, and then go back and add your headings. I mean, I'm not sure how your headings are, but your main heading should be level 2 headings like this. Here's one heading, here's another heading, and here's a third heading. I don't know how many main headings you have, but the main heading should be a level 2 heading.
Okay.
And so you're probably going to have anywhere between 2 to 4 main headings, more or less, for your literature review. So, however you want to do it, just copy and paste it and then start kind of moving your data around. I would go ahead and add here at the bottom your research questions, and I would add your thesis statement here at the beginning where your introduction later will be. Don't worry about writing your introduction now, if you have an introduction, fine, but go ahead and insert your current thesis statement at the end of your introduction. And leave yourself notes if you say, okay, I still need to change my introduction. Select something here and go insert comment and make yourself notes too. And then that way too I can see that you still need to change this or whatever. Organize it however, whatever makes sense for you. But this is where your literature review will go here. And the only thing the main difference at the end will be the inclusion of research questions. So much like we did in applied linguistics, that last paragraph will be kind of a type of conclusion in the sense that you'll restate your thesis and then introduce your research questions. And so this last paragraph will be a transition from the theory into your own research that will then later go into the method section.
Okay, let me see if I can do that. So if I paste it and the part will be erased?
Yeah, so I wouldn't select everything. I would just select the headings, like from here to here. Well, from here to more or less here. And then just remember that the main heading should be level 2. Maybe you already have it like that, but
okay.
But don't select because your research questions will go down here at the bottom, and your introduction will go here. Now, if you already have your introduction, then select from here to here, so that we keep the title, and you can add the title later.
Oh, okay. Let me see if I can paste it.
Okay, now you've selected the title of the work, so you may eliminate the title. So try to select from here, from introduction to here, if possible.
Just paste it.
Just copy and paste it over. If you have, are you copying it from a Word document or? Okay, so it should work. If you have it open now, go ahead and try it.
Yeah.
There we go. All right. So for example, you can remove the word introduction, and so giving instructions. So maybe this is your first heading, perhaps. But see, you'll have to modify this. So for example, giving instructions, you'll need to move this over to the left, like I just did. See that? So giving instructions looks like it's your first heading, right? Okay. So you'll have to move this over to the left, right? but you more or less have it.
Yeah, because actually
Now-
it was like my literature was like directed to students. Now I want to do
All right.
it like directed to teachers.
Right. So I'm just gonna highlight this.
Uh-huh.
Add your thesis statement here. So this will be a little bit different than what you have here,
Uh-huh.
but this is where it'll go, and then you have your first section, and so on. Now, one thing to think about are the sections. So when you have your level 2 heading, and that's why I mentioned you'll probably have anywhere between 2 to 4 headings, because you're going to have approximately 2,250 words in the thesis and the literature review. That's not the introduction, because the whole literature review is 2,500 words. The introduction more or less is 250 to 350 words. So if you subtract that out, that should leave you with 2,250 words. Now, if you divide that up equally into equal sections, let's say you have 2,250 words, you divide that into, let's say, 3 main sections. That's going to leave you around 750 words per section, and that's reasonable.
Okay.
You might even have 2 headings divided by 2. Now that will leave you over 1,000 words, but you might have maybe 2 level 3 headings, perhaps. Okay. Or probably the most headings you'll have, 2,250 divided by 4. That's 560 words. That's probably the limit. You probably don't want to have more than 4 main headings, because then your word count is going to go pretty low. Now, if you know that you have one section that's a lot more words, then you may have to reduce. your headings. Yeah, you just don't want. What you don't want is like a heading for one paragraph. I don't think. Yeah. So that's the thing you want to try to avoid, and ask yourself if you're going to just have level 2 headings, or if you're going to also need a third level heading. So that would be like a subheading in from the main heading. Does that make sense? So it's like an outline basically. So this would be a level 2 headings are going to be your main headings, and then you'll have a level 3 heading that is part of the paragraph in bold that are subheadings of these main headings. And these level 2 headings are subheadings of the main level 1 heading. See what I mean? So you're going to have anywhere between 2 to 3 level headings. This is a level 1, the title here, and this is a level 2. And if a level 3 heading will be part of the paragraph, indented, starting off first word capitalized only, ending with a period, that would be a level 3 heading, and that will go inside the paragraph. So if you have one main section here that's really long, then you might have to divide up that text perhaps into another heading, a level 3 heading. Okay. But I'll work with you on that. Right now,
I'm trying.
just think about the order, and the thing to do right now is get these main headings right. We need to know, are you going to have 2, 3, or 4 main headings, what they are, what's the order in which you're presenting your information. And I encourage you to go to modules in Canvas to week 2, where it says developing an argument. And here I explain in detail how you can go about organizing your data, your information in your literature review. Okay, so please look at that, and I give 3 examples of ways that you can order or organize your work, and how to form a good academic argument, because essentially in your literature review you're forming an argument. Okay, and think of your thesis statement as that one sentence that's the main idea of your literature review, but it's also the answer to your research questions.
The thesis.
And the thesis statement is like your answer in one sentence to your research questions. Now, everything else that you develop within your literature review is to support or as an argument based on the thesis statement.
Okay.
So basically everything in your literature review is designed to form an argument that answers your research questions. Okay, so take a look at that. Also, make sure you're checking the announcements. There's a lot of announcements, and I don't know if you've had a chance to look at them, but it's all information that I send to everyone that's I think worth reviewing. So we'll have a lot more announcements. In fact, I typically do announcement at the end of each week, kind of a summary based on what I'm seeing and trying to give tips and suggestions. So try to check out all of the announcements that are posted in Canvas, and again look at the argument here, developing an argument in week 2.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes. And one more question.
Yes.
Remember that we were talking about making a survey that will count like as a instrument.
Yeah. If it looks like we need a questionnaire, that would be an instrument.
Yeah. A questionnaire before investigating.
Right. Right.
To know which teachers am I going to observe.
Right. And you're not concerned with L1, L2, right? Or,
yeah.
So it doesn't matter if they use L1, L2, right?
No, it's more like English instructions.
Okay, but it doesn't matter if they give instructions in English or Spanish?
Well,
Okay, so if it doesn't, I don't think you will even need a questionnaire, because every teacher at some point gives instructions. I don't think I have a problem finding teachers to give instructions, so you may not need a survey. At this point, I don't see a need.
No, but remember what we talked about, to see if the teachers have problems to give instructions.
Okay, to identify if they had problems giving instructions. Okay, yeah. Well, maybe.
Well, maybe we'll.
Yeah, maybe we can.
Maybe we provide.
Yeah, we could do that, I guess. Yeah, no, we could do that. We can think about, because we also need to think about how many teachers, right? 2.
2.
Okay.
2.
So if you have like a school, for example, just trying to logistically make this easier, if you have one school that to focus on 2 teachers from the same school, then maybe you could apply a questionnaire to the teachers. Just a very basic questionnaire.
Okay.
Just kind of to filter, to find and determine which teachers you can use. Yeah, that's an option. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
All right. Anything else?
No, I will send you my questions and then during the week, because I don't want to.
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead and add your research questions to Google Drive. Don't forget the reflection it's due on Sundays. You can do that anytime during the week. And we'll continue next week, and I'll look at what you have, and if at any point you want me to look at something before next Friday, just send me an email on Canvas and I'll take a look. Otherwise, we'll sit down and look at what you have and talk about organization. That's going to be the big focus between now and February 28th, which is when this is due, is how you're organizing your information. And also grammar and all that fun stuff.
All that. Yes.
All right, Lucía, looks good. Then we'll see you next week.
Yes.
All right. Have a good weekend.
You too.
Thank you. Bye.